just about anything. Is there a fear as it relates to women, as it relates possibly to, well, any woman in your life, your mother, your wife, anybody that you have difficulty expressing?
If women want to invoke fear, I mean, I can't believe
already they're on the defensive.
I can't believe a woman would be that unprincipled. But every man had a mother.
Yeah.
That's the threat. But no, I kind of take them one at a time.
I hope so.
And Sheena and I are 17 years now.
Yeah, I know.
So I believe in the system.
So I mean, you have no difficulty at all talking to Sheena about whatever it is that's troubling you, whatever it's troubling you.
Yeah, occasionally. We were divorced once.
Okay, we'll talk about that, but let's get this underway. We have as our guest clinical psychologist Dr. Ken Druck, and he's the author of Secrets Men Keep, and that certainly is something we're going to be discussing today. He's here to share fears that are common to most men, and we'll find out if that is one of them. Dr. Druck, nice to have you with us again. Is there a common fear that bonds us all as men?
I think there is, Gary. I think, we have to, any discussion of men's fears has to begin with a whole area of emotions. That essentially, as boys, we're taught that to feel is to fail, that emotions are a sign of weakness, that we learn to become ashamed of this emotion called fear. I mean, anger is a good male emotion, but fear, to tell you that I'm scared, it's like big boys don't cry. So we learn to suppress that. And often what women see, and we were talking about the women's magazines, and women trying to figure men out, often that wall of silence, or that mysterious quiet, or the retreat behind the newspaper or the television, is really that something's bugging him. He's afraid of something, and he's worrying about something. And usually, unfortunately, we only find this out later on, in a counseling session when they're sitting there, and he says, well, you really want to know what's going on? I'm upset, I'm scared. This is what's happening. And when we get into the specific fears, we find the fear of losing our sense of our manhood, our virility, that, the very essence of who we are as human, as men. We're going to lose that. That's
now,
one
you're talking about age and also sexual prowess.
Absolutely. All those range of things. Age, you look into the mirror and you say, my goodness, I'm changing. And am I losing value? I'm no longer this young stud. Am I losing value? Is this something? And then the fear of, for example, appearing feminine. A man once told me a story. He says, I'll never forget it. He says, once, I think I was 11, 12 years old, my father was standing next to me, and I made some gesture. It must have been feminine. My dad reached over, grabbed my wrist, and squeezed it. And I felt that on my wrist for my entire life. It was a signal to me that I was doing something feminine, that I was acting on that male scale, doing something that ranked me as less of a man in his eyes.
Funny, Andy Griffith did this to me in a movie that I did with him. I was a choir director, and I was just having the best time directing the choir. And he came up to me after the shot, and he said, we're going to do that again. But this time, don't break your wrists. I said, why, Andy? He says, well, it doesn't look manly. He was very serious about this. Another time in a Western, a guy said, never put your hat over your crotch. I said, why? He said, it's not manly.
But by the way, John Wayne stressed that John Ford, the famous great director, said to him, don't ever feel sorry for yourself in a Western. If your predicament is hopeless, make the audience cry.
Yes. Yeah, right. But again, we go back to the fear of appearing weak.
Exactly.
A fear of appearing vulnerable.
We're afraid that we're going to lose our value, that we're going to be seen as less of men. So sometimes we puff up, even when we're not feeling that way, and our entire emotional lives become a mystery. And especially to the women who are living with us, who often just see that wall of silence, or that resistance. When she comes home and says, we have to talk, he goes, oh, God, because he's afraid that it's going to expose that emotional world. Now, what's beginning to happen is that men are beginning to develop their emotional vocabularies, that we're realizing that we don't often communicate exactly the way women do. We communicate in stories. You ask a man, you don't ask a man, how do you feel? You say, why don't you tell me what happened, Mort? How was it to have had your show? How was it being on the West Coast? And in that story, the likelihood is that Mort will drop down into some emotions and he'll tell me what the meaning was of that experience to him. There's another way that we communicate as men, and that's through code. That joking behavior, all the back slapping and the butt slapping that we see, that is a very intricate code, and it's how men express in a very systematic way their affection for one another, their anger with one another.
But Ken, we don't fear the guy in the locker room at the golf club. We don't fear his using that against us at some point. And a lot of men, and you may be able to tell me a percentage, but men fear that is ultimately going to be used against them if they appear to be weak in a relationship. Now, why do they feel that? And what do they really have to fear? And are we both male, female? Are we playing this game? Have all of us bought into it, so to speak?
I think we have. I think we play the game of always having to be strong. You know, we're told, be a man, and that means be in charge, handle it, master it, be in control. If it's broken, fix it. That we're supposed to always be in control, and this is where the fear of losing control emotionally or losing control of your relationship comes from. So I think that we tend to define strength as men as always being in control. An interesting story a man told me recently about an experience he had with his son, because we transmit this to our children, was that he came home and he looked in the garage, his son's puttering around with something and trying to lift something onto his workbench. And he looks over at his son, he says, son, are you using all your strength? And the boy says, Dad, what do you think I'm doing? And he asked the boy struggles again, he says, son, are you sure you're using all your strength? And the kid by now is getting upset with his father. He says, yeah, Dad, I'm using all my strength. And finally the father paused and then looked over and said, son, I don't think you're using all your strength. You haven't asked for my help. And I think that redefines what strength really is and can be in men's lives.
We're going to be talking about infidelity as it relates to men and their fears about that. And let me tell you, there are a passel of them. We'll be right back with a man who dealt with that most serious form of fear, betrayal, when we come back. We've done many segments over the years on infidelity from a woman's point of view, but today let's examine a man's perspective. Reese Reeves lives in San Diego. His marriage ended when his wife left him for his best friend. He's here with marriage counselor and author of How to Save Your Marriage from an Affair, Dr. Ron Adell. First of all, Reese, before I get your story, man's reaction to infidelity. Can we sum that up fairly quickly?
Men really have a very hard time. They get very angry, very explosive. There's a tremendous amount of inner rage, and they retaliate, they punish, and it's a very difficult thing because they don't express any of their feelings. It stays underground.
All right. Now, Reese, let's talk about your situation. Your wife left you for your best friend, and what were your feelings, and how did you feel betrayed? In what manner?
Well, the two people that you trust the most in your life, all of a sudden, everything's jerked out from under you. You're speechless. Can't catch your breath. What do you do? Where do you turn? It's a very disorienting feeling.
Did you confront both of them?
Sure. Yeah, right there.
Yeah. And what was said?
What was said? I asked how long this had been going on, which is a normal question, I presume. And obviously there's no answer to it. And immediately there was a movement towards each other as a consolidating position that we're in this together. So you know that really you're closed out. What do you do?
I don't know. That's why we're here discussing it today. Dr. Adell, is it important to the man to have a reason? Is it important to establish a justification, a right, a wrong, a blame putting?
Not really. Those are mostly needed for interpretation, something to embrace and to hold on to. What really happens to the male in that situation is that there's a tremendous emotional castration because his recreation center has been damaged emotionally.
Interesting term.
Recreation center?
That's right.
We all have it, I hope.
We're going to get letters about that.
And the man then carries that issue with him and displaces it, and there's a loss of his masculinity, his potency. And a man needs a tremendous sense of control over his woman and has a leash on her for a great extent. And when women get into the work field, at the present time, more than 50% of all women in the work field have had an affair or are in the process of having one. 50%. So men read these things in the literature and the magazines, and they put leashes on their wives in order to maintain their feelings of security. Mm-hmm. And it becomes very difficult because the women feel imprisoned, and they resent that, and they rebel, where it used to be the other way years ago. And it's a very difficult thing. When Reese goes home and he finds this happening, the first instinct is you want to punish, you want to hit, you want to be physical. And 1 in 25 situations where there's an infidelity has a lot of physical violence.
Reese, first of all, was your wife working?
No.
All right. Did you put any unreasonable, he mentioned leash, any unreasonable parameters on your wife? I mean, were you concerned about her, nervous about her?
Not at all.
In her relationship with anyone else?
No.
All right, so it came as a complete shock. Now, what did Reese go through afterwards?
What did I go through
Yeah,
afterwards?
now Dr. Adele has described a number of feelings post-affair.
Probably the first thing that I did, I ran into the seminars that Ron was doing on infidelity, recovery. And there, you learn to get some of this out. And the basic thing for me, and like a lot of men, was how do you express what's going on inside? And by being able to begin expressing it, then you begin to deal with it.
All right. Did you try to recapture your wife after the affair?
No.
You didn't date her again or see her again or
He had
have...
sex with her for 6 months after that.
Oh, he did. He had a sexual relationship.
It was an ongoing relationship there. It's hard to unwind after being married for 10, 11, 12 years.
Well, what's going on in your head when you know that she is involved with your best friend
Right.
and you're involved with her at the same time, and I won't use the term that Dr. Adele did, but this is a very personal, and at one time was, I guess in your mind, a possession. That was your life, your wife. How can you share, and is there a sort of, I don't know, vindictiveness involved here? I mean, are you getting even? Are you showing your best friend that...
It wasn't a matter of getting even, nor was it a matter of sharing. It was basically a matter of just unwinding the relationship. With kids involved, it's very difficult just to close the door one day and walk away.
Oh, so in other words, you had the contact because of children and you were at the house and
Yes.
so forth. And I guess, I don't know, you just don't wipe away. How many years were you married?
Almost 12.
Yeah. What do you think, Mo?
Well, I'm just thinking about what about the overt meaning of all this? Do the American women really want us to be like them, to, not keep our feelings submerged? What about our overt feelings? They really want us on groups to discuss this and rationalize this? What about the punitive feeling?
Well, I think that's definitely there, Mort. I think it's a very hard thing for a woman to recognize when the situation's reverse what a man feels. The woman immediately tends to, in these situations, be angry and blame, as well as when the other situation happens the other way. For a man to allow his anger to come out, he's so afraid of losing control, particularly in a situation like this. The reason I feel that Reese maintained the physical relationship with his wife was mostly for a sense of maintaining and saying, control and my ego. I can still have her after this Holocaust with this best friend. I can still have her. Now I have the power still. She still wants me. I can still please her. And it had nothing to do with love or really an elongation of the relationship, only a statement of, I have succeeded again in getting back what I wanted. Now I can throw it away.
All right, Reese, I know you've remarried and you have a new family.
Yes.
What about the time between your wife and your remarriage? What was your reaction to befriending someone, to dating someone, to having a good friend of yours, a male friend, around this new person you're dating? I mean, what happened to your fears in those areas?
Very difficult to establish relationships to begin with. And how do you trust someone? Because basically that's the underlying basis in a relationship is trust. How can I trust this person to really be open and express what I feel or how I feel towards them? So it takes a long time, as the saying goes. It's not easy.
I'm curious, is your ex-wife and your ex-best friend, are they still together?
At this time, yes.
Well, it is encouraging in a sense. I might also mention that Dr. Adele does seminars across the country on infidelity and surviving infidelity. If you had to sum it up, Dr. Adele, how do you recover from this?
Well, it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of ability to understand yourself and to give yourself time to heal and to learn and to grow. An infidelity can be a very, very large growing experience because you can learn so much about why this happened and what happens to you and your own feelings. And it takes a lot of courage, strength, and discipline to face yourself and look at yourself in the mirror.
Thank you, Dr. Adele. Thank you, Reese, very much. How do men...
Well, if your wife has not been true to you, you can either shoot her or you can take her shopping. I'm not following all this.
All right, we'll put it all together. As a
Yes,
matter of fact, the last two segments of the show today, we'll have all of our experts back, as well as Mort and myself, and we'll sort of have an overview, a discussion, just an open discussion about what we've learned, what we can learn, and what we can do to change things, if there are things to be changed. And we'll hear from Mr. Sahl, I'm sure. Now, we're going to deal this particular few moments with the office. Now, is the office a place where men become sexual prey, as well as women? Dr. Herb Goldberg, author of The Inner Male, recently helped construct a survey for Men's Health magazine that involved 600 men and produced some interesting results about men's feelings in the workplace. First of all, Dr. Goldberg, what did the survey say about sex being a disruptive factor in the office?
Well, I think that men are as concerned about it, particularly nowadays where it's a fairly charged sort of situation. A man doesn't really know sometimes what he can and cannot do. And in days of past, a man could come on to a woman kind of casually and not worry about it. Nowadays, he's liable to face he suddenly realized that what he thought was sort of a casual sort of advance turns out in the woman's experience to be a harassment.
Now, there was a question about a handshake, a slap on the back, and a hand on the knee.
Right. I think the survey asked which one of them was more acceptable, and I think that I was surprised because more men seemed to feel that touching the knee was more acceptable than a kiss on the cheek, and I don't agree with that. I think that touching the knee is much more provocative than.
But then that may give you an insight into what men are really feeling about intimacy.
Well, actually, maybe if a man's
Don't
conscious.
Smirk, Mort. Now, come on.
Well, I mean, what
I
is
can
a
see
guy-
the wheels going around here.
Is a guy facing a sentence in a federal prison for sexual harassment because he works on I don't know about this.
Well, I don't think men really know where they are today in the
sexual
office
signals
place.
in work situations are crazy nowadays. It's really hard to decipher what is appropriate and what is not
Well, I'll tell
appropriate.
you what
It's a scary
shocked-
situation.
I'll tell you what shocked me out of this study, survey, whatever you want to call it, that 27%, or just under 27% of the people you surveyed had sex in the office.
Mm-hmm.
You don't give any credit to how often.
Well, to me, that's
Where are
very
they doing this?
understandable. Well, close the door, I guess. But you know, the office is a very sexy place because everybody's symbols, which is, to me, sexual excitement has a lot to do with fantasy and symbols. You know, a woman meets Mr. Success. She doesn't even know who he is. Or a man meets a woman and...
Mrs. Success. Or
Well,
Miss Success.
no. Actually, men are attracted to different kind of symbols. They're more appearance sort of symbols. The office is loaded with the man's power symbols out there, you know, the guy who's the boss or the guy who's doing well, and the woman who's dressing in a provocative way is actually a much more sexual place, as far as I'm concerned, than the home is, where sex is supposed to take place. Doesn't surprise me that sex would heat up very quickly.
But
in the
isn't it
office.
the generation? I mean, isn't it the materialism of this generation? I mean, power was always sexual, and guys always had offices. Isn't it the sacred desire of the generation of yuppies to become wealthy? I mean, that's like your sacred duty?
As opposed to, you mean, are you talking about instead
Well, I
of...
mean, when did the office become this?
I think the office has always been that way, but then you had the sexual revolution.
No,
of
the
last
office has
15
always
years.
been sexual,
Yeah,
not
but-
to this degree, but now you're seeing a switch. Now you're seeing men having relationships and not being terribly bothered about it with women who are their superiors, which we didn't have in the past.
Yeah, and that's another thing that the survey showed was quite a number of men have had advances made to them by a woman in power over them, which I think is very heartening. And interestingly enough, when men were asked to decide if they were had an advance from a woman in power versus a woman who was like beneath them in power, close to 50% preferred the woman in power versus the woman who was powerless, which kind of the cliche that used to be around that men are attracted when they are totally in control, I think is shifting.
I don't know, though. It would seem to me that having an affair with your boss would give you some sort of power, wouldn't it, if you don't have it by employment?
Right, but the cliche, the traditional cliche about men, you may be right, maybe it's all opportunistic, but the traditional cliche about men is that they like to be in power, and they really only get turned on sexually when they feel in control and powerful, and this survey is suggesting that is shifting, and that's a healthy shift.
Yeah, another interesting thing, this is the last one we have time for, was that one of the questions, have you ever been the subject of a malicious and or, gossipy rumor? And I think 40 or so percent of them said yes, and then said, how many of the rumors were true? They said 40%.
Malicious and accurate rumors, 100% true.
So what is the workplace today? I will note that 70% said they
There's
don't
one
want to
other
change
point
it.
there which I think was very important. Many men felt that they should have a right to indicate when they feel a woman is harassing them sexually. Now, women, the sexual harassment takes a different form. So, for example, because sex can often be used in the service of power, I think women need to realize that men's inexperience is also vulnerable. And if a woman is provocative in some way sexually, and the man falls for that, he's vulnerable, because people don't say, generally in the office, people will point the finger more at him, and many of the men felt they should have a right to ask women not to dress in certain provocative ways.
Is that right? Now,
I thought that was an interesting finding,
we
too.
will find out from Dr. Goldberg if you at home wives and or husbands who have wives in the workforce have something to worry about as a result of this. Herb, I'll see you a little bit later on in the program. In a moment, we're going to find out what role mothers play in all men's lives, and mighty important at that. Now we're going to talk about Mom, and boy, what a place she occupies in our lives. What about your mother? A lot of impact on your life?
Yeah, great sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
I see it in my work. I see it in my son. It's his sense of humor, very much like his grandmother. She was terrific. But by the way, you know, my father was a star there. She loved him, and she had no doubts about it, and he had no doubts about it. Neither one of them had to go into counseling. Neither one of them were victims. And although I never asked them, I should have asked them if they were liberals.
According to our next guest, much of what all of us feel can be attributed to our mother. Family therapist and author of A Choice of Heroes, Mark Gerzon, is here to explain Mom's relationship with her son. Now, most men, is it safe to say, have a lifelong goal, or maybe they don't even recognize it, but they want to break away, not only, I'm not too sure about father, but from, is that taking care of an infant and changing diapers and being in the delivery room and so forth is different than a father being there to counter the mother's influence. I would think that we would once again go back to the traditional influences the mother would have on a son.
Yes, I think for sons, again, I think the presence of the father, I think, makes it easier for a son. Because if you've got mothers taking care of you at home, you've got preschool teachers who are women, you've got elementary school teachers who are women, if you don't really encounter men until you get to be 10, 12, 14 as baseball coaches or whatever, I think it's hard for boys to sort of assert themselves as men if they don't have any men in that environment. I remember as a boy growing up in Indiana, the only man I saw working regularly in my neighborhood was a garbage man. And the garbage men were my heroes, because they came, they lifted these big cans, they threw them into the garbage truck. There was a real, my dad went off to his office, and it was like all these other men, but there were these men that came by to lift the garbage cans.
When does the influence wane? When he leaves to go to college, or when he gets out of college?
Well, I think it wanes consciously around adolescence, when you start to pull away at high school, you're dating, you're off, you've got your car, you go to college. That's when it wanes consciously. But I think if you look back at the show today, look at a lot of these themes that have been raised about how you feel when you lose your wife in infidelity, or what men's fears are about dependency or about being close, or even the sex in the office issue. I think what you have is this unconscious reservoir of feelings that can resurface once you have a primary relationship with a woman where you can act them out.
Yeah. All right, one of the things we will discuss with Mark when we return is how and when and why we confuse our wives with our mothers, and what happens as a result. Because in a moment, our experts are going to be joining us to find out more about how men feel. I'm back with our man of the hour and our experts, Dr. Ken Druck, Dr. Ron Adell, Dr. Herb Goldberg, and Mark Gerzon. All right, we continue this, gentlemen.
Oh,
all right,
hello.
I want to ask you,
Yes.
Mort, what have you learned from today's discussion? I mean, what can we take away from this program?
Louis Calhoun, also an actor.
I don't want to hear about Louis Calhoun.
Louis Calhoun, you might like what he said, though. He
Okay.
said, don't ever tell your wife you're out of work or you're depressed. What did he mean by that? In other words, you can only be in action? What about when you're out of action?
No, he meant be strong, I would assume. Henry Ford said, don't complain, don't explain.
Does that mean we don't have as many choices as women?
I don't know. Do we have that many choices as women?
I think
Herb.
what Mort just hit upon is really important. You know, women are now aware of the fact that they are certainly articulating their feeling of always having been an object in the eyes of men, but men are at least as much of an object in the eyes of women and of each other. in most situations, a man is a success object to the extent to which he is making it, he's visible. To the extent that he's not making it or even unemployed, God forbid, he becomes invisible and he disappears as a human being.
Now, are you saying that we have, and this is funny, we talked about women's options for so long, are you saying we have less options?
I think so, and also, I mean, the reality is that, you know, men look at women's bodies, supposedly, or faces, but women look at men's occupations, which is just as dehumanizing. It's just as impersonal. A man can have high status and be a total creep, but yet, if he has high status, women will pay attention to him. If he has low status and he's actually a very fine human being, he's very likely to get ignored.
The way I'd put it, Gary, is that I think men have more options in the outer world, and women have tended to have fewer options in the outer world. But in the inner world, I think women have more options than we do. I think when it comes to feelings, experience, sharing, friendship, intimacy, women are as comfortable moving in that terrain as we have traditionally been moving in that outer terrain.
And unencumbered by code. They didn't come up with the Geneva Convention. We did. Women don't take any prisoners.
Yeah. You think they're turning us all into a bunch of sissies, though, don't you, Mort?
I think that there's a feminization in this country. I hate to have the program at this point on a low note, but I'm willing to document it with jokes. The new women with the independent income and no marriage and no emotional vulnerability who want to find an office boy half their age they can go to bed with and not call the next day and deduct 80% of it under current tax laws as a business expense, the new women are exactly like the old men were. They're telling us from here they want us to become caring and nurturing, that they want to go to bed with Woody Allen. From here they want to go to bed with Clint Eastwood. They don't fool me. You don't fool me.
All right, respond,
But
Ken.
you know what, Gary?
What?
And more, what are we doing, instead of saying, you know, we're the victims of these women, what do we do to ourselves? I mean, what is the male culture? Here we have, for the first time, and I'm delighted that we have a show in which men can get together and discuss. This is completely unique. What happens when we get together and we start talking about these issues? Validating feelings, talking about, hey, you're going through that too? Suddenly we break out of the isolation. It's what we've also been doing to ourselves by being silent. You know, at age, I mean, we're raised in completely different social patterns. At age 15, my sister was on the telephone 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, no, we're talking about football, we're talking about golf, we're talking about everything but our feelings.
She was learning the language of the
personal. What can we learn then, Ken, from talking about our feelings today?
We need to, first of all, find out that there is a safe place to be able to talk about what's going on and what's happening at a different stage of our life, what our dreams are, what our aspirations are, what we're struggling with towards the intimacy with women. We need to be able to get a valid sense that that's okay, that that's going on, instead of getting a sense like that we're weak or there's something's wrong with us, that we're not handling it. We need a sense that that's okay, but that's one step en route to understanding ourselves better. The goal is to know ourselves.
Yes, Dr. Dell.
I think we have to really be honest with ourselves and recognize that fear is a belief system, and that when we're talking about the way men are in our society, everybody has an individual choice, and it has to do, I feel, with the realm of security or insecurity in a person as to how we function and what our choices are. We make choices. Somebody wants power, you take it. If you don't, then you acquiesce. I really believe that society creates trends that people tend to follow rather than being independent and paving a way for themselves.
All right, but the point is, how are we going to get rid of all this fear that we're carrying around?
Fear is, again...
And we'll discuss that when we come back.